All right, so we're diving deep today into a whole stack of news coming straight out of India, all from February 24th, 2025. The goal, we want to get a real feel for what's making headlines, but also, sort of understand what's driving India forward, even on the world stage. And we've got a pretty diverse mix here. We're talking health, a pretty scary international incident, some big trade talks, the always exciting world of cricket, and even some political stuff, too.
It really is striking how all these stories, different as they seem, they all kind of connect. Like we'll see how something happening across the world can stir things up in India's local politics, or how like global money trends end up changing how Indian society functions.
Yeah, it's all connected. So, okay, first up, a headline that really gets you thinking about like where India's headed. The country's dealing with more and more people becoming obese. 135 million Indians are officially obese, and there's this prediction saying India could become get this, the diabetes capital of the world.
It's a serious issue, and Prime Minister Modi, he's definitely taking notice. In a recent speech, he urged folks to cut down on oil consumption by 10%. He's pointing to how diets are changing in India, moving away from the traditional millet-based meals to foods that are much higher in oil. It's like a wake-up call, right? But it also shows how India's rapid development is messing with, like, deeply ingrained eating habits.
Right, and it's kind of ironic given the global push for, sustainable food. The UN even declared 2023 the International Year of Millets, and India wants to be like the top millet producer. But actually getting people to change what they eat, that's tough. Even with big names like Niraj Chopra and Nikhat Zareen promoting healthier lifestyles, it makes you wonder, like, do these campaigns really make a difference in what people choose to eat?
It's such a complex web, right? You've got government initiatives, cultural shifts happening, and then individual choices on top of that. It's pretty much impossible to say this campaign directly caused this change. Okay, let's switch gears to something that really shook things up, that American Airlines flight. You know, the one heading to India from New York. Had to make an emergency landing in Rome because of a bomb threat.
Yeah, fighter jets escorting a passenger plane to safety. That's some intense stuff. Lavanga's report said authorities got a credible tip that there might be a bomb on board. I mean, this brings up all sorts of questions about airport security, especially with all the rising global tension these days.
No doubt. And while everyone's praising the authorities for reacting so quickly and handling the situation smoothly, it does make you think about how vulnerable air travel really is. We need to be constantly on guard.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, shifting gears again. Let's talk about international relations. The UK and India are finally restarting their trade talks. We're talking about a potential trade deal worth a whopping £41 billion, with India on track to become the world's third largest economy.
Right, and these talks were stalled for a while because of elections and disagreements over things like, well, whiskey tariffs and visa rules, things that directly impact everyday people and businesses. And adding another layer of complexity here, this is the very first formal meeting since the Labour Party took over in Britain.
Yeah, so given all the history between these two countries and the whole current political climate, it's anyone's guess how these talks will turn out. But the stakes are seriously high for both sides.
Agreed. Okay, ready for a topic that's bound to spark some debate. Cricket. Pakistan's loss to India in the Champions Trophy has caused quite the stir.
For sure, former Pakistani fast bowler Shoaib Akhtar, he didn't hold back at all. He straight up called the Pakistan Cricket Board's management brainless and clueless. He was particularly critical of their team selection strategy, saying their over-reliance on all-rounders left them weak against India's heavy hitters like Sharma, Kohli, and Gill.
Akhtar's words, they were harsh. But they make a valid point. Are the right people leading the PCB? And what's interesting is his criticism wasn't aimed at the players themselves. He was going after the management, which adds fuel to this whole debate about who's really responsible when things go wrong in sports.
And it's more than just a loss on the field. In Pakistan, this is a national issue. Meanwhile, India's celebrating a pretty much guaranteed spot in the semifinals. It just goes to show how intense the rivalry between these two cricket giants is.
Speaking of national pride, India's win sparked celebrations everywhere. Big names like Rahul Gandhi, Amit Shah, and Mamata Banerjee all came out praising the team. It's interesting how much politicians get involved in sports in India. It shows just how deeply connected people feel to their teams.
Yeah, Gandhi was all about Kohli's century. Shah emphasized how the team lived up to the expectations of fans all over the world. Even Piyush Goyal, the Minister of Commerce and Industry, he chimed in praising their teamwork. It was a moment that brought the whole country together.
Now for a story that has global repercussions. India has banned the export of two highly addictive opioids, tapentadol and cursoprodol.
This comes right on the heels of that BBC investigation, remember? The one that uncovered this disturbing trend. These drugs were being illegally shipped out of India by a company in Mumbai, Avio Pharmaceuticals. They were sending them to West African countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire, feeding a public health crisis.
What makes this even more troubling is this particular combo of drugs isn't approved for use anywhere in the world. It's just too dangerous. We're talking about breathing problems, seizures, and a high potential for addiction. The FDA even raided Avio's factory, seized their stock, and shut down production. This is a big move by India, a sign that they're serious about global health and taking responsibility for what their pharmaceutical industry is doing.
All right, let's jump into the financial world. PhonePe, the digital payments platform backed by Walmart, is getting ready to launch on the Indian stock market.
This is a huge deal for PhonePe, especially since they just announced their first ever profitable year with a consolidated profit of 1.97 billion rupees. And get this, a 74% jump in revenue, and they control a whopping 48.4% of all UPI payments. They're a major player in India's digital economy.
And their IPO is happening at such an interesting time given how volatile the Indian stock market's been lately. People are going to be drawing comparisons to Paytm's massive 2021 IPO for sure. Everyone's going to be watching to see what happens.
Yeah, it really highlights how much India's fintech sector has grown and how attractive it is to global investors. Okay, so let's look at another financial trend that's been making headlines, the big outflow of foreign investment from Indian equities.
Yeah, foreign institutional investors, or FIIs, have pulled out a staggering 1.1 lakh crore rupees from Indian equities in 2025 so far, and that's led to a 4% drop in the Nifty.
That's a lot of money leaving the market. The reasons behind this outflow are complex. High valuations, weaker than expected corporate earnings, and profit booking all play a part. And the outflows were especially bad in January and February, putting a lot of pressure on the rupee.
So what does all this mean for India's economic future? Investors are keeping a close eye on things like the U.S. core PCE price index and India's own GDP growth. Some experts think that once corporate earnings pick up and global liquidity improves, the market will bounce back.
Right. And it's worth noting that there's been growing interest in Chinese equities, which are seen as undervalued right now. And with big Indian IPOs like Jio and Aether Energy on the horizon, things are going to keep shifting. It's a complicated situation with both short-term anxieties and long-term potential.
Okay, over to the international political scene. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni gave a speech at CPAC in the U.S. that's gotten people talking.
Yeah, her speech was a pretty pointed critique of the global left. She basically accused them of being overly dramatic and hypocritical in how they treat conservative leaders. She even compared the praise heaped on people like Bill Clinton and Tony Blair in the past with the criticism directed at figures like Donald Trump, Narendra Modi, and Javier Milei today.
Yeah, it definitely seems like Meloni's trying to point out the growing influence of conservative movements in European politics. She argues that this is making the left nervous. She really hammered home conservative values: freedom, border security, and protecting businesses from what she called green leftist insanity.
Yeah, that phrase definitely got people's attention. And her comments about how U.S.-Europe relations will be just fine under Trump, it seems like she's signaling a growing sense of unity among conservatives worldwide.
And finally, some news from Jammu and Kashmir. The Jamaat-e-Islami, a group that was previously banned, is starting a brand new political party. It's called the Jammu Kashmir Justice Development Front, or JDF for short.
This is a big deal, considering their past and the whole complex political situation in their region. They've officially submitted their application to the Election Commission and requested the scale symbol. It's a bold move, making people wonder about their true intentions and whether they're really committed to participating in the democratic process.
Shamim Ahmed Bokar, the head of their Jammu and Kashmir unit, he said they spoke with leaders in every district before taking this step. It suggests a certain level of organization and a desire to move beyond just running as independent candidates to becoming a legitimate political party.
It'll be fascinating to see what happens. The JDF entering the scene could really shake things up in Jammu and Kashmir, potentially challenging established parties like the PDP and their leader Mehbooba Mufti.
Yeah, and you can't forget the Jamaat's history. They have a strong presence in the region, over 5,000 members, but they were banned for their alleged involvement in terrorism and actions against India. So them joining the political scene is sure to generate both interest and concern. This is definitely a story we'll be keeping an eye on. And we're back, continuing our deep dive into all this news from India, all dated February 24th, 2025. It's fascinating, right, how these stories kind of give us a snapshot of where India's at right now.
Totally. It's this mix of economic wins like we're seeing, but also some serious challenges. And then you've got these local events that end up having global ripple effects, plus this constant push and pull between holding on to tradition and, forging ahead into the future.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so remember PhonePe, the company getting ready for its IPO, it's not just another business story, is kind of symbolic of how much India's fintech scene is booming. They've got, get this, nearly half of all those unified payments interface transactions. We're talking like 310 million online transactions every single day.
It really shows how quickly India's embraced this whole digital payments thing. The government's push for a cashless society, plus everyone having smartphones and cheap data, it's created the perfect conditions for fintech to take off.
It really makes you think about how much influence the government actually has, right? Like when they put their weight behind something, it can lead to massive changes. But then, like we saw with that whole opioid export ban, you need regulations and oversight, especially in a field that's growing as fast as fintech.
Absolutely, you can't just let things run wild. Data security, making sure everyone has access to financial services, and making sure innovation doesn't come at a cost, those are big challenges when a sector is taking off like this.
Okay, so let's go back to that outflow of foreign investment from Indian equities. That's something that's got people worried about how stable India's economy really is.
Right, it's true that those FIIs, those foreign institutional investors, they've pulled out a huge amount of money, 1.1 lakh crore rupees from Indian equities just this year. And yeah, the Nifty's down 4% because of it.
A lot of people are nervous, but isn't it true that markets go up and down? Like, even with this outflow, India's economy is still fundamentally strong, isn't it? They've got a young and growing population, a middle class that's getting bigger, and a government that seems committed to reform.
That's exactly right. It's this tension between short-term ups and downs and long-term potential. And honestly, for some investors, this outflow might actually be a good thing. They might see it as a chance to buy into the market when prices are lower.
Oh, interesting. So it's like one person's panic is another person's opportunity.
Exactly. And don't forget about those big IPOs coming up, like Reliance Jio and Ather Energy. They could bring a fresh wave of capital into the Indian market.
Oh, yeah, those are going to be big. Geo's already shaken up the telecom industry with their super cheap data plans, and Ather Energy is at the forefront of the EV revolution in India. Those IPOs are creating a lot of excitement, and they show how diverse and dynamic India's economy really is.
They're a sign that even with the ups and downs, there's still tons of confidence in India's growth story. Okay, so let's circle back to that ban on exporting tapentadol and carisoprodol. That had global repercussions, right?
For sure, it shows that India's taking its role in global health seriously. By stopping those harmful opioids from being illegally exported, they're sending a strong signal.
That BBC investigation was really eye-opening. It exposed this whole underground network of drug trafficking, with Avio Pharmaceuticals at the center, sending those dangerous opioids to really vulnerable communities in West Africa.
It's pretty impressive how quickly India acted. They raided the factory, seized the stock, and stopped production right away. It shows they're willing to take real action to address this global health crisis.
It does raise some important questions, though, right? How effective are India's drug regulations? And what about the ethics of pharmaceutical companies? They have a responsibility to make sure their products aren't being misused.
Okay, now let's shift gears to Jammu and Kashmir. The Jamaat-e-Islami deciding to start a new political party, the JDF, that's created quite a stir.
Yeah, and it's not surprising given their history. I mean, they were banned for supposedly being involved in terrorism and acting against India. So their entry into the political arena is, well, let's just say it's a pretty big deal.
Some people are pretty skeptical. They're wondering what their real motives are and if they're actually serious about playing by the rules of democracy. But then others see it as a chance, like maybe they're finally ready to engage in mainstream politics and help the region develop.
It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. Having the GDF on the scene could really upset the balance of power in Jammu and Kashmir. They might even end up challenging the established parties like the PDP, led by Mehbooba Mufti, and their stance on sensitive issues like Article 370, the one that gave special status to the region. That's going to be under a microscope.
It's a reminder that Jammu and Kashmir's political landscape is constantly in flux. Adding the JDF to the mix just makes things even more complicated.
Okay, so zooming back out to the global stage, that speech by Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni at CPAC, that's still generating a lot of buzz.
Yeah, a lot of conservatives really connected with her message, especially when she called out what she called the hysteria of the left and how they have double standards when it comes to judging conservative leaders.
Her speech really tapped into this global trend we're seeing, the rise of populism and nationalism. A lot of people feel like they've been left behind by globalization, and they're pushing back against what they see as the excesses of liberal ideology.
It's a debate that's happening all over the world. And it has implications for how countries relate to each other, how we talk about politics, and even how societies function.
Meloni definitely struck a nerve with those who feel like liberal values have become too dominant. Her speech shows that the political landscape is definitely shifting. We're seeing new alliances forming based on shared values and ideologies.
Okay, back to sports. Let's talk about Shave Akhtar's outbursts after Pakistan lost to India in cricket. It caused quite a controversy.
Yeah, it did. But I think it also reflects how frustrated Pakistani cricket fans are. They've seen their team struggle, and when Akhtar pulled the Pakistan Cricket Board's management brainless and clueless, he was saying out loud what a lot of people were thinking.
His criticism was harsh, but it raised an important question. Should former players be allowed to speak out against sports organizations? Some people say it's good to get their perspective, but others worry it could hurt the team's morale.
It's a tough one. Where do you draw the line between constructive criticism and just being negative? And we can't forget the context of this rivalry. When India and Pakistan play cricket, it's never just a game. It's about national pride and all this historical baggage.
It's amazing how sports can become a mirror for what's happening in society. This match wasn't just about cricket, it was about leadership, national identity, and the desire to be the best.
Now let's talk about Prime Minister Modi's call to cut down on oil consumption by 10%. It sounds simple, but it could have a big impact on India's health.
With 135 million Indians already obese and predictions that India could become the diabetes capital of the world, it's clear that Modi's trying to tackle a growing health crisis.
And it goes beyond individual choices, right? It's about how diets are changing, the rise of processed food, and how globalization is affecting food culture.
It's a reminder that our health isn't just about what we choose to eat. It's also about the environment we live in and the messages we're bombarded with.
Absolutely. To tackle this health crisis, we need a multi-pronged approach. We need education, awareness campaigns, and we need to start promoting healthy habits early on. It's a tough challenge, but acknowledging the problem and being proactive is a good first step.
As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm struck by how much these stories are about India finding its place in the world.
Totally. They're navigating international trade talks, responding to global health crises, and making waves in finance and technology. India is definitely stepping onto the world stage.
But with that global engagement comes responsibility, right? Like we saw with the opioid export ban and the whole debate about India's role in promoting global health and security.
It's a delicate balancing act, and these stories give us a glimpse into how India is trying to manage it all.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into all this news from India, all dated February 24th, 2025. It's been a whirlwind, right?
Yeah, we've seen how India's tackling challenges at home while at the same time, stepping onto the world stage. But I think what really stands out is how resilient and dynamic India is.
Okay, so let's start with something that shows the power of, well, holding people accountable, that ban on exporting tapentadol and cursiprodol. It really shows how investigative journalism can lead to real change.
Oh yeah, that BBC report that exposed those opioids being illegally shipped to West Africa by Evio Pharmaceuticals, that was a game changer. It forced the Indian government to really confront this issue and take action to protect people's health, not just in India, but globally too.
It's kind of amazing how one report can have such a huge impact, you know? It shows how important a free press is for keeping those in power in check.
Totally. And it wasn't just about shutting down one bad company. It sparked a much bigger conversation about how India regulates its pharmaceutical industry, especially when it comes to exporting drugs that could be harmful.
All right, let's shift gears to something that always gets people fired up, cricket. That Champions Trophy match between India and Pakistan, man, that was intense.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much history between those two cricketing giants. And that match really captured the whole country's attention. But it also brought up some deeper tensions, some underlying anxieties that are always there.
Yeah, and then you had Shoaib Akhtar's rant against the Pakistan Cricket Board. That really blew up, calling their management brainless and clueless. I mean, a lot of fans were feeling that frustration, too, after seeing their team struggle.
It was controversial, for sure, but it got people talking about leadership and accountability in sports. And you have to remember the pressure these guys are under, especially in a rivalry as big as India-Pakistan.
It's funny how sports can be like a mini version of what's happening in society, right? That cricket match became this outlet for people to express the frustrations, not just about the game, but about leadership, national pride, and this desire to be the best.
And don't forget the political angle. I mean, India winning. The whole country erupted in celebration. Politicians were tripping over themselves to congratulate the team. It just shows how powerful the connection is between sports and national identity.
But like we talked about before, when sports and politics get mixed up like that, it raises some tricky questions. Does it bring people together? Or does it just turn something that should be fun and unifying into something political?
Yeah, it's not a simple issue. There's no easy answer. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I think one thing that's really clear is that India is changing fast. They're taking on a bigger role in the world, tackling global issues, and, figuring out how to navigate this increasingly complex world.
Yeah, from dealing with health crises to jumping into the world of finance and technology to negotiating those big trade deals, India's making its mark. And they're doing it all while dealing with internal challenges and having these big debates that show just how vibrant and dynamic their democracy is.
The stories we've looked at, they're just a small snapshot of what's happening in India. It's a reminder that India's story isn't finished yet. It's still being written, and every chapter is full of challenges, successes, and this constant drive to move forward.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the news from India. We hope you found it insightful, and maybe it'll inspire you to learn more about what's happening in this incredible country. Thanks for joining us.